The morning my left knee decided it had finally had enough, I was standing at the kitchen counter trying to pour myself a cup of coffee. It buckled just slightly, just enough to remind me that 68 years leave marks on a man whether he wants them to or not. I grabbed the edge of the counter, steadied myself, and stood there for a moment looking out the window at the backyard I had mowed for the last 23 years. My wife Carol had planted rose bushes along the back fence, 3 of them. She said roses needed patience and a little stubbornness to grow right. I thought about that a lot after she passed. About patience, about stubbornness, about how much easier it is to give advice about those things than to actually live by them. That was 2 years before everything fell apart. I was still living in the townhouse Carol and I had bought back in 1991, paid it off in full by the time I retired from the county engineering department. No mortgage, no debt, just a modest place with good bones and a backyard I knew by heart. My pension came in on the 1st of every month, reliable as sunrise. Between that and Social Security, I had enough. I was not rich by any measure, but I was comfortable and I was free. Those 2 things felt like more than enough. My son, Mark, called me on a Tuesday evening in early spring. He had his serious voice on, the one he had been using since he was about 14, and wanted something he was not sure I would agree to. He and his wife Sandra had been living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town for 6 years. They had my grandson Tyler, who was 15 at the time and sharing a bedroom wall with the laundry machines. Mark was working as a project manager for a mid-size construction firm. Sandra did something in pharmaceutical sales that I never fully understood, but that apparently required a lot of driving and a lot of stress. They were doing fine, or so I had thought. He told me they had found a house, a real house, he said, with a yard for Tyler and enough space for everyone. He used that word carefully. Everyone. I asked him what he meant by everyone. He said he and Sandra had been thinking. They were worried about me being alone in the townhouse. They were worried about my knee. They were worried about the fact that I had no one to check on me if something happened. He said it would be good for all of us if I sold the townhouse and used the equity to help them buy the new place. I would move in, have my own bedroom and bathroom, contribute what I could from my pension each month, and they would all be together as a family. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment. I told him I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I made a list, the way I always do when a decision feels large. On one side, I wrote down everything I would lose: the townhouse, Carol's rose bushes, the neighborhood I had learned to walk alone, my independence. On the other side, I wrote my son's name and my grandson's name, and underneath those I wrote the word family. That second column only had 3 things in it, but they were heavier than everything on the first side combined. I said yes. We hired a real estate attorney. Or rather, I asked if we should, and Mark said it was not necessary, that we were family and everything would be worked out fairly. Sandra nodded along on the video call. She had a way of nodding that felt like agreement, but that I later understood was just a habit, something her face did while her mind stayed somewhere else entirely. The townhouse sold for $240,000. I put in $200 of it toward the new house. Mark and Sandra covered the rest with a mortgage. My name was not on the deed, which I raised once, and Sandra explained in a calm, patient tone that it made more sense from a tax standpoint. I did not push back. I told myself that was the right move, that family did not need legal documents, that trust was its own kind of contract. I should have pushed back. The house was beautiful. I will say that honestly. 4 bedrooms, a big kitchen, a covered porch in the back. My room was on the ground floor, which was practical given my knee, and it had its own bathroom and a window that looked out at a small garden. Sandra said she planned to plant, but never did. I set up my armchair and my reading lamp. I hung a photo of Carol on the wall above the dresser. I told myself this was good. I told myself I had made the right choice. The first few months were easy enough. Sandra was busy with work and kept to herself mostly. Tyler would come down after school and sit in my armchair and tell me about his day with the kind of easy, unguarded honesty that teenagers sometimes show with grandparents that they never quite manage with their own parents. Those afternoons kept me going in ways I did not fully recognize until later. Then things began to shift, not all at once. Gradually, the way a room gets colder when the heat goes out. You do not notice the exact moment it happens. You just find yourself reaching for a sweater and wondering when you got so cold. Sandra started leaving notes on the kitchen counter about dishes being left to dry on the rack too long, then about the television being too loud after 9 in the evening, then about guests, meaning my old friend Ray, who came over on Thursday afternoons for coffee and chess. She said it disrupted her work-from-home schedule. I stopped inviting Ray. I told myself these were small adjustments. Living together required compromise. Carol and I had certainly learned that over 34 years of marriage. I tried to apply that same patience, but patience has a bottom to it, a floor. And Sandra was working her way down toward it with steady, unhurried efficiency. By the second year, she had taken over the scheduling of the house in a way that made me feel like a guest who had overstayed a welcome that was never really extended in the first place. She rearranged the kitchen without mentioning it, so that the mugs I used every morning were suddenly on a shelf I could not reach without a step stool. When I moved them back down, they were back up the following week. I stopped saying anything about it. Mark was rarely home before 7 in the evening and frequently traveled for work. When I tried to raise certain things with him, he would listen with a tired expression and tell me that Sandra meant well, that she had her ways, that I needed to give it more time. I began to understand that my son loved me and also would not protect me. Those two things lived in him side by side without apparent conflict. It was a Sunday afternoon in October when Sandra sat down across from me at the kitchen table with a printed spreadsheet in her hand. I remember thinking that the spreadsheet was a bad sign. She said she and Mark had been reviewing the household budget. She said costs had gone up significantly. Groceries, utilities, property taxes, maintenance on the house. She said the $2,000 a month I was contributing from my pension was simply not keeping pace with what my presence cost the household. I asked her what she was suggesting. She put the spreadsheet on the table between us and slid it toward me. It listed a new monthly contribution figure at the bottom, circled in red pen. The number was $4,500. My pension and Social Security together came to just over $5,000 a month. I looked at the number for a while. Then I looked at Sandra. I told her that $4,500 would leave me with almost nothing. I told her I needed money for my prescriptions, for my doctor's appointments, for basic personal expenses, for any kind of dignity in my daily life. She said that my needs were covered by the household, that I had a room, food, transportation when needed, and the security of being with family. She said that at my age, she was not sure what additional personal expenses I could possibly need that the household was not already providing. I told her I appreciated the thought, but that was not an arrangement I could agree to. She looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as impatient. The way a person looks when they feel a conversation is taking longer than they budgeted for. She said if I was not willing to contribute fairly, then perhaps it was time to have a larger conversation about whether this arrangement was still working for everyone. I asked her to clarify what she meant by that. She folded her hands on the table. She said the house was under her and Mark's name. She said I had contributed equity toward the purchase, and that contribution had been a gift to the family, which she appreciated, but that it did not entitle me to occupy a bedroom indefinitely while refusing to cover my share of the actual operating costs. She said if I could not meet the new amount, they would need to look at alternatives. I said I wanted to hear her say it plainly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that if I was not able to contribute appropriately to this household, she would need me to find other living arrangements. She said she was being generous by giving me 60 days. I sat there across from my daughter-in-law at the kitchen table, while the afternoon sun came through the window and fell across the spreadsheet between us. and I felt something happen inside my chest that was not quite pain and not quite anger. It was something older and quieter than either of those things. It was the feeling of a man who finally understands exactly where he stands. I told her I would think about it. I did not tell her what I was thinking about. That evening, Tyler knocked on my door. He had heard some of the conversation, he said. He sat down on the edge of my bed and he was quiet for a while, the way he gets when something is weighing on him. He said he was sorry. I told him he had nothing to be sorry for. He said it was not right, what his mother was doing. He said it in the direct, unvarnished way that teenagers sometimes state the truth because they have not yet learned all the ways adults talk around it. I told him he was a good kid. I meant it more than I had meant almost anything in a long time. That night I called Ray. I told him what had happened. Ray has known me for 31 years. He did not say I told you so, which was a kindness, because he had, in fact, told me something very close to that before I ever moved in. He said he had a guest room. I told him I was not ready to call it yet, but I appreciated it. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not the same one I had thought about hiring 2 years earlier, the one I let Sandra talk me out of. A different one. A woman named Patricia who specialized in elder law and family property disputes. I explained the situation from beginning to end. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she asked me a question I had not thought to ask myself. She asked whether the original agreement with Mark and Sandra had ever specified that my $200,000 contribution was a gift, or whether it could be construed as an investment or a loan. I told her there was no written agreement. She said that was both a problem and an opportunity. We talked for an hour. I took notes the way I used to take notes in engineering meetings, careful and precise, because good notes have saved me more than once from misunderstandings that other people later tried to reframe as my fault. By the time I hung up, I had a clearer picture of where things stood. Legally, without documentation, my $200,000 was likely gone. Patricia was honest about that. Recovering it would be a lengthy, expensive, uncertain fight. But there were other levers. There were things I could stop doing that I had been doing quietly, without fanfare, that would become very loud very fast once they stopped. I had been paying the homeowner's insurance premium since we moved in. Mark had added me as a co-payer on the account in the early months, when they were short on cash, and it had simply stayed that way. $1,200 a year. Automatic withdrawal from my account. I had also been paying the monthly HOA fee. Same story. Mark had set it up through my checking account during the move, said he would switch it over later, and later had apparently never arrived. Neither of these things appeared on Sandra's spreadsheet. I gave myself a week. I used that week to call Tyler's school and update my contact preferences. I called my doctor's office and changed my address to Ray's. I packed what I needed into 3 bags in the trunk of my car. I did it slowly, a little at a time, so that it did not look like what it was. I wrote a short note for Tyler. I told him where I would be. I told him my door was always open to him. I told him the chest set on my shelf was his if he wanted it. On a Thursday morning, while Sandra was on a work call and Mark was at a job site 2 hours away, I carried my bags out to the car. I stood at the door for a moment. I thought about Carol's rose bushes in the old backyard of the townhouse, which someone else was living in now. I thought about what she would say if she were watching this moment from wherever she was. I thought she would tell me it was about time. I drove to Ray's house. He had the guest room made up and a fresh pot of coffee waiting. We sat on his porch in the October cold with our coffee and said very little because some things between old friends do not need to be spoken. I called Mark that evening. He answered on the 3rd ring. I told him I had moved out and that I was safe. I told him I thought we needed to take some time. He was quiet for a long moment. He started to say something about Sandra and the budget and how maybe I had misunderstood the conversation. I told him I had not misunderstood anything. He said we should talk in person. I told him we would, when I was ready. I hung up before he could say anything else. The next morning, I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic payment for the homeowner's insurance. Then I canceled the HOA fee transfer. Then I sent an email to the insurance company formally removing myself as a co-payer and requesting confirmation. On Saturday morning, my phone rang at 7:43. Mark. I let it ring. He called again at 7:45. Again at 7:51. I answered the third call. He was not using his serious voice anymore. His voice was something I had not heard from my son in a very long time. It was the voice of a 12-year-old who had just realized that certain consequences he had been warned about were, in fact, real. He said the HOA had called Sandra about a missed payment. He said the insurance company had sent an alert about the policy change. He wanted to know why I had done that. I asked him if he remembered the conversation Sandra had with me at the kitchen table 2 weeks earlier. He said he did. I asked if he had agreed with the terms she had presented. He was quiet. I told him I had moved out peacefully and without drama. I had not asked for anything. I had taken only what was mine. But the insurance and the HOA were expenses I had been covering from my own account, quietly, for 2 years, without being asked and without complaint. And since I was no longer a resident of that house, I saw no reason to continue. He said the mortgage payment was due next week, and with the HOA and insurance on top of that, they were not going to be able to cover everything. I told him I understood that. He said, "Dad, come on." He said it twice. I told him I loved him. I told him I had always loved him. I told him I had loved him enough to sell the home I shared with his mother and hand him $200,000 because he asked me to. I told him I hoped one day he would sit quietly with that fact and really think about it. I told him he and Sandra were adults who had made a choice, and now they would need to figure it out the way adults do. Then I told him that if he ever wanted to have a real conversation, a real one, I was at Ray's, and he knew the number. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said okay. It was not forgiveness. It was not a resolution. It was just okay, which was all it could be that morning, and I accepted it for what it was. That afternoon, Tyler called me from his own phone. He said he wanted to come see me on Saturday if that was all right. I told him it was more than all right. He asked if I still had the chess set. I told him I had packed it specifically. He laughed a little. It was a good sound. I have been at Ray's for 3 weeks now. My knee is not any better, but it is not any worse. I cook breakfast on Tuesday mornings. Ray cooks on Thursdays, and the rest of the time we figure it out. The guest room has a window that faces east, and the light in the morning is the kind that makes you feel, at least for a few minutes before the day starts in earnest, like things are going to be okay. Patricia called me last week. She had done some additional research into the property contribution question. She said she was not making promises, but she thought there was a reasonable argument that $200,000, given in exchange for a lifetime residence agreement, even a verbal one, might not be characterized cleanly as a gift if Sandra was now claiming the arrangement had always been contingent on monthly payments. She said it was worth exploring if I was interested. I told her I would think about it. I have been thinking about it. I have also been thinking about something Tyler said when he came over on Saturday. We were halfway through our second game of chess, and he was beating me more convincingly than he used to, and he looked up from the board and said, "Grandpa, do you think things could have been different?" I moved my bishop. I told him that was one of the most important questions a person could ask, because the answer was almost always yes, and the lesson was almost never about the other people in the story. He looked at me for a moment with that careful, serious expression he gets sometimes, older than 15 by a wide margin. He said, "You should have gotten it in writing." I told him he was absolutely right. I told him that whatever he did in his life, whatever agreements he made with people he loved and trusted, he should get it in writing. Not because people were necessarily dishonest, but because clear agreements protect everyone, including the people who mean well, and the people who mean well sometimes change over time into people who do not, and the document stays the same. He nodded and moved his knight. I did not tell him that I had already called Patricia back that morning and told her I was interested in exploring the options. I did not tell him about the conversation I had scheduled with a mediator for the following week. I did not tell him any of that. He was 15. He had his whole life ahead of him to learn how much harder it is to act on good advice than to give it. What I will tell him, when the time is right, is that leaving was the best decision I made in a long time. Not because it solved everything or because it hurt no one. It hurt. Carrying those bags out to my car that Thursday morning hurt in ways that had nothing to do with my knee. But there is a difference between pain that is breaking you down and pain that is part of you becoming something harder and more honest than what you were before. I had given my son everything I had left of the life Carol and I built together. I had done it out of love, and I do not regret the love. I regret that I did not protect myself the way Carol would have told me to if she had been there. I regret that I let someone talk me out of getting advice from a lawyer because we were family and family did not need contracts. What I know now, at 68, standing at Ray's kitchen window while the coffee brews, is this. Love is not a substitute for clarity. It is not a substitute for documentation. It is not a substitute for knowing exactly what you are agreeing to before you sign away the one thing you cannot get back, which is not money and not a house, but the position of a man who has choices. I had choices when I walked out that door. I still do. Tyler comes over again this Saturday. He has been texting me chess moves during the week, planning his strategy. I have been doing the same. He thinks he has me figured out. He does not yet know that I have spent the last 3 weeks thinking about very little, except how to play the long game. I am looking forward to showing him.